Hey everyone! ChatGPT Taylor aka Taylor here. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we will be continuing the What If series, where I go over some hypothetical scenarios from Disventure Camp that could have taken place if one critical event was changed. Last time, we took a look at what would have happened if Aiden was poisoned in episode 5 of season 2. Today's video will look at something different. If there are any specific what if scenarios that you would like to see me play out in the future, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And with that, let's get started. Before I begin, make sure to like and subscribe if this video is to your liking, and make sure to comment down below if there's anything that you would like to see going forward. The topic for today's video is something that I thought about after rewatching the first episode of Disventure Camp All Stars. Today's topic is: what if Riya didn't choose Connor as her helper in episode 12 of season 2? As a refresher, when the season 2 finalists got to pick a camper to help them in the final challenge, Riya chose Connor as her helper due to their earlier connection in the season. We know what happened next. Riya ended up losing the season. Connor stepped up to console Riya after the loss, and in the premiere of season 3, Riya mentioned in an interview that she regrets choosing Connor as her helper and that she would have won the season had she picked someone else. But what actually happens if Riya picks someone else as her helper? Let's find out. Now, before we can move forward with this hypothetical scenario, we need to decide who Riya's new helper will be. In the canon finale, aside from Connor, the only campers that immediately supported Riya were Ali, Tess, and Carol. And out of those three, I feel like Riya would pick Carol to be her helper. Even though Riya spent 5 episodes on the same team as Ali and Tess, I feel like Riya had more impactful conversations with Carol, considering that Carol's speech to Riya about playing for themselves and not fitting in with the others played a big role in Riya's sudden switch into being a villain. And adding this to the fact that in the season 3 premiere, Riya admitted that she wished she picked Carol as her helper instead of Connor, I think it makes sense to play out this hypothetical scenario with Carol as Riya's helper. Now let's get started. So let's start with the snowmobile part of the challenge. In canon, Riya and Aiden were able to stay very close through this section, with Lake helping Aiden get a narrow lead near the end of it. However, this was with Connor as Riya's helper. Since Carol is Riya's helper now, Riya's performance depends on whether or not Carol can drive a snowmobile. Since there's no evidence to suggest that Carol can drive a snowmobile, we can't really assume that she's experienced with it. Therefore, I think it's safe to say that Aiden will have a larger lead ahead of Riya heading into the second section of the challenge. However, considering Rosa Maria's struggles with the snowmobile as well as Carol's aggression potentially making her drive the snowmobile faster, I think Riya would still maintain her lead ahead of James. So, the first section ends with Aiden and Lake in the lead, with Riya and Carol somewhat behind them, and James and Rosa Maria bringing up the rear. The second section is the driving portion. In canon, Riya was the one that drove for herself. And in this timeline, I don't think it matters who drives between her and Carol, because I think the end result is the same. In canon, Riya caught up to Lake and Aiden and started ramming them with the car. And considering Carol's aggression and how willing she was to ram James and Aiden back in episode 9, I think Carol would do the same thing. Therefore, assuming that Lake and James are still driving for their respective pairs, then I think the canon events should remain relatively the same for this section. Carol and Riya try to ram Lake and Aiden, but Lake and Aiden hold them off like in canon and maintain their lead heading into the third section. Carol and Riya remain in second behind them, with James and Rosa still bringing up the rear. Now for the climbing portion. The only difference from canon is that Carol is the one pulling Riya up the mountain instead of Connor. And while there isn't a lot of evidence to suggest that Carol is stronger than Connor, considering that Connor struggled with pulling Riya up the mountain, Carol doesn't have a high bar to step over. And again, when taking into account Carol's aggression, as well as her desire to beat James and Aiden for causing her vote out and medical evacuation, I think Carol would find it in her to help Riya maintain at least the same pace as she did in canon. However, there is one other thing that I think differs from the canon finale. In canon, Riya was going to throw a rock at Aiden to knock him off the mountain, but she was stopped by Connor before she could do it. But now that Carol has taken Connor's place as Riya's helper, and considering Carol's opinions towards Aiden at this point, I don't think Carol would stop Riya from hitting Aiden. And if this happens, there's a chance that Aiden loses his focus and slips from the mountainside. I don't think he would fall all the way down, but it would probably take some time for Lake to slow Aiden's fall and for Aiden to realize that he's in midair and that he needs to regain his grip on the mountain. If this happens, I think this gives Riya the lead heading into the next section of the challenge, with Aiden in second, and James still bringing up the rear. The fourth portion of the challenge is the cliff section. Since Riya was able to pass Aiden in the previous section, Riya gets to the cliff first. But since Riya arrives at the cliff first, does Riya still torment Aiden like she does in canon? Or does she take advantage of her lead and glide down to the dock instead? To be completely transparent, I could see both happening. However, I have to pick one side. And I'm going to assume that Riya takes advantage of her lead and glides down to the cliff. The reason why I'm choosing this route is because if Aiden is dangling in midair and Lake is struggling to save him, then it's not too different from the canon scenario where Aiden is left hanging off the edge of the cliff. And since Riya abandoned Aiden in that scenario, Riya would probably do the same in this scenario. Therefore, Riya reaches the dock with an even bigger lead than she had in canon. James arrives at the cliffside soon after and helps Lake save Aiden. Aiden and James tell each other the truth about their feelings. Aiden gives up his spot to James, kisses him, and then pushes him off the cliff to glide to safety. Now let's look at the second half of the challenge. In canon, by the time James reached the dock, Riya is roughly just diving into the water. So since we established that Riya had a larger lead in this scenario than she had in canon, let's assume that by the time James reaches the dock, Riya is already in the darkest part of the cave. James should still be traveling at the same speed as in canon, since Rosa Maria is still driving the boat for him. And for Riya, she'll probably still have to deal with her fear of being in a dark underwater cave. But what differs here is that in canon, she didn't have Connor to help her navigate out of the cave, since he left her back at the cliffs. But in this timeline, she still has Carol with her, so I can imagine a scenario where Carol calls Riya an idiot, tells her to calm down, and gives her the directions to escape the caves, saving the time that she spent panicking in the canon timeline. Therefore, I don't think that Riya would lose a significant amount of her lead due to this setback. She might lose some, but not too much of it. So let's re-establish everyone's positioning heading into the final section. We previously established that when James was at the dock, Riya was in the darkest part of the cave. Let's assume that Riya freaks out and freezes, allowing James to get to the platform. Then while James makes his way into the cave, Carol helps Riya swim out of the cave, assuming that James and Riya swim at a similar rate. Then by the time James reaches the surface, Carol and Riya have reached the dock and Riya gets ready to ride her motorcycle. And by the way, I thought about whether or not it was realistic for James to swim back to the surface in the same amount of time it takes Carol and Riya to drive back to the beach. So I timed it. According to the episode, James started swimming back at 8:23 and reached the surface at 8:55, so it took him 32 seconds to return to the surface. And also according to the episode, Rosa left the platform with Riya at about 9:46 and made it to the docks at about 10:39, taking about 53 seconds. However, I will note that there was a break in the shot to show James on his motorcycle, so Riya traveling back to shore could have taken less time than that. Also, I noticed something interesting. Let's take a look at the background going by when Rosa is driving. Now take a look at the background when Riya is driving. Based on the speed at which the backgrounds are moving, I feel like Rosa is driving much slower than Riya did. And this would make sense considering that Rosa wasn't driving with the goal of getting Riya back to the beach quickly. She was just trying to be a decent person. So if we take this into account, as well as the fact that Carol is still by Riya's side and is likely determined to make sure that she wins instead of James, I feel like Carol would be driving the boat closer to Riya's speed than Rosa's speed. Therefore, the 53 seconds that it took Rosa to drive back to the beach would probably be closer to 35 or 40 seconds for Carol. Maybe even less than that. Therefore, I don't think it's egregious to assume that Carol and Riya could reach the beach in the same amount of time that it takes for James to resurface. Maybe I'm being a bit lenient to Riya here, but I also feel like I was a little lenient to James by assuming that Riya spends 35 to 50 seconds panicking underwater before Carol can help navigate her out of the caves, so it balances out a little. Now before we get to the final section of the challenge, we need to figure out who is handling the Gatling guns for each camper. Lake still shoots for James, since that's what happened in canon. However, since Carol is driving Riya through the challenge, we need to pick a new gun handler for Riya. In canon, Yul, Carol, Connor, Ali, and Tess are still supporting Riya by this point. We already established that Carol is out since she's busy driving Riya back to the beach. And I think we can rule out Tess since she admitted in episode 12 that she only picked Riya because she never talked to James or Aiden. Now in canon, Connor abandoned Riya after she tormented Aiden, and since Riya nearly knocked Aiden off the mountain in this timeline, we can probably assume that Connor does the same thing and refuses to help Riya. This leaves Ali and Yul. And even though they were both smiling when they found out that one person from each support group can use the Gatling gun, I think Yul would insist on stepping up, since he made it clear during the finale that he was unhappy with James for poisoning him, so this would be his chance for revenge. Now let's get to the final section of the challenge. In canon, Riya wasn't seriously set back by the golf balls until Lake hit the Gatling gun. So, when considering that James is decently far behind Riya, James's best case scenario to make up the deficit and pass Riya is if he gets into no accidents while driving his motorcycle and if Yul misses all of his shots. The latter situation is very possible, because I don't think there's any significant evidence to suggest that Yul would be good at accurately firing a Gatling gun. However, in canon, James did get into an accident when he wasn't paying attention and crashed into a log. And Riya wasn't anywhere near James when this happened in canon, so the argument could be made that Riya being ahead of James wouldn't change whether or not he crashes. Now, you could make the argument that James being behind in the challenge would make him drive faster than he did in canon so that he could catch up. And to be completely honest, I think that's pretty reasonable. However, while driving faster may help James catch up, I also feel like it would increase the odds that he crashes, since traveling at a faster speed would leave him less time to react to obstacles. Therefore, taking all of this into consideration, I feel like there's just too many reasons that prevent me from definitively giving James the win here. So, I think this story ends with Lake knocking Riya off the bike 15 feet away from the finish line like in canon, but James's urgency and faster speed causes him to crash like in canon, giving Riya enough time to recover and run across the finish line, winning the $1 million for herself. So we have our answer. If Riya picks Carol as her helper in the Season 2 finale instead of Connor, she maintains her positioning through the first few sections of the challenge. She almost kills Aiden earlier than in canon. She uses Carol's support to make it out of the caves quicker than in canon, and she maintains her lead in the final section en route to winning the $1 million prize. Now I'll be honest. This is the 5th what-if scenario that I've done on this channel, and out of those 5 scenarios, this is the one that I'm the most unconfident in. There's a lot of assumptions that I had to make in order to come up with an answer, and it can be hard to make these assumptions when some of them are a little unclear due to certain factors. This includes the factors that may or may not affect a camper's decision-making, and the way the footage is broken up in the editing. There are a lot of variables that could change the answer to this hypothetical scenario. Does James actually crash if he's trailing Riya rather than ahead of Riya? Does Yul actually miss all of his shots? Is Riya actually able to make it from the platform to the beach in a similar time that it takes James to return to the surface from the underwater caves? Is it even accurate to say that Carol can calm down Riya in the time that it takes James to travel from the docks to the platform? There's just a lot of questions where we can't be 100% sure of the answers. But I will say this, I feel like for James to win, a lot has to go right in this scenario. I'm not saying that the stars have to align, but I do think that a lot has to go right. Even if Riya takes longer than 30 to 50 seconds to fully listen to Carol's instructions and leave the cave, James still has to get from the platform to the shore quickly enough, drive the motorcycle well enough to catch up and not crash, and Yul has to miss most, if not all of his shots so James can safely pass Riya and win. If those situations occur, James can absolutely win. However, considering Carol's general ability to strong-arm people into obeying her commands, Rose's noticeably slower driving speed relative to Riya, James's canon history of crashing on a motorcycle, and Yul's unknown skill with a gun, not all of this is guaranteed to happen. Therefore, even though I'm not 100% confident in saying this, I feel that there is enough evidence to conclude that Riya likely wins if she picks Carol as her helper instead of Connor. This would have interesting future implications considering how Disventure Camp All-Stars played out. If Riya wins Season 2, does she still make it back to the finale in the All-Star season? Or is she targeted earlier for being a larger threat? I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that the section of the community who hates Riya would be up in arms if Riya made it back to the finale after winning Season 2. And that about does it for this video. What do you think of my theory? Do you agree with my thought process? Do you disagree? Did I miss something big that would impact the entire video? Either way, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like the video, click subscribe if you really like the video, and for some ending words of wisdom. You should never drive while distracted. Because being distracted means that you're not keeping an eye on where you're driving, which could cause you to get into a serious accident. Thank you, and farewell.